everyone, and welcome back to Faith in Flour. I'm Robin, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you step-by-step how I made a sourdough starter, and later in the video, I'm going to show you some of the great ways I've been using it. It all starts with just 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. Just make sure that your water is filtered and doesn't contain any chlorine. I'm using whole wheat flour, and I know that our choices may be limited at this time, so whatever type of wheat flour that you have at home, as long as it is unbleached, should work. It takes about 7 days to complete your starter and only a few minutes a day in which you have to attend to it, so this is going to be day 1. I promise you that this is going to be a super easy project that doesn't take much time at all. And these are not my own ideas. I actually used a cookbook that a friend gave me years ago on traditional bread making to make a starter, but I have not been doing it lately. I've been using a couple of different sources for information on how to make one that's a little less complicated than that cookbook that I had, and this really did fit the bill, and I have been having loads of fun with it. There is a revival of bread making and sourdough bread making right now. With everyone being able to stay home, it's a little bit easier to take on projects like this, and it's also something super fun that you can do with your kids while they're at home. After the water and the flour have been well incorporated, just cover it with a dish towel and set it aside somewhere in your kitchen. For the first 5 days, you are going to feed your starter each day, and there's just a few simple steps that you'll need to take. So uncover your starter, and you can see mine on the second day had separated a little bit. There's a little bit of darkish liquid on the top. That's all fine. Just stir it right back together, and then you are going to discard half of this mixture and add another cup of water and another cup of flour. I know that you guys are going to have a lot of questions that I probably don't get to in this video in order to keep this video from becoming too long. There are 2 other YouTube channels, Farmhouse on Boone and Mary's Nest, that do a wonderful job of answering all of your questions on sourdough, so I'll have those linked in the description box, along with the recipes that I'm using today and the step-by-step instructions on how to make the starter. So after I thoroughly mixed the starter on the second day, I got really technical and wanted to measure it to make sure that I discarded just half, and I kind of got over that in the subsequent days because you do not need to be that precise, but you'll wind up with approximately a cup of starter, so discard about a half, so a half a cup. And I know a lot of you are going to ask, why do you have to discard half of the starter? Isn't that wasteful? And yeah, it's wasteful. But it is only wasteful for the first 7 days, and the reason why you have to do this is because you wouldn't be able to feed it enough flour and water to keep it a size that was manageable. It would just keep growing, doubling each day, and it would be too much starter for anybody to be able to use reasonably. So there are some great ideas for how to use your discarded starter after the 7 days when your starter has become mature, so that if you are concerned about wasting starter, there will be plenty of things that you can do with it, and that will not be an issue. So again, you're going to add a cup of filtered water, and it is important that your water doesn't contain any chlorine in it. If you take it straight from the tap and it's city water that has chlorine, that could kill the yeast that you're trying to develop in your starter. So be careful of that. I just have a Brita charcoal filter, and that does a great job. It was perfect for my starter, and I'm sure any type of filtration that you have will work as well, or you can buy filtered water. I also mentioned that I'm using whole wheat flour, and so I got this tip from Mary's Nest. Actually, the very best, most foolproof type of flour that you can use is rye flour, and that wasn't something that was easy for me to get at the store. I think you can order it, although a lot of the flours are kind of hard to get right now. So if you want to use an all-purpose flour, as long as it's unbleached, it should also work. You just might not see results as fast, and I want to refer you again to Mary's Nest because she has the most information that I could find that was super easy to understand on her channel. So I will have her channel linked in the description box below. And of course, you guys can feel free to ask me any questions that you'd like in the comments. So day 3, 24 hours later, it was time to feed my starter again, and I was already seeing some bubbling and some action, which is super exciting after just 3 days. Also by day 3, I was noticing a really nice yeasty or sourdough bread type smell. So I knew that things were starting to work, and you can see the bubbles on the side. We are getting some really good action, and if you are not by day 3, that is perfectly fine. When I did this before, it took me a lot longer. So just be patient and just keep following the steps, and at the end of the 7 days, you should be getting somewhere. So again, on day 3, we are going to follow the same steps. We are going to discard 1/2 of the starter and then mix into it 1 cup of filtered water and 1 cup of flour. Once everything is well combined, cover it and set it aside in your kitchen until the next day. Just a little background on sourdough. Before we all had yeast in nice convenient little packets or jars, people captured yeast this way, and the yeast actually lives on the grain of the flours, and this is the way to give it the conditions that it needs to develop. And you don't have to worry about bad bacterias forming. If that were to happen, it would be very obvious. It would smell bad. You would see like fuzzy mold on it, and usually within the 7 days, the yeast overpowers anything else that's growing in there and keeps that in check. So that should never be a concern. And like I said, if it were, it would be very, very obvious to you. And so people have been doing this for hundreds of years. In fact, a lot of families, pass their starter down from generation to generation, just kept it going. And the longer you have it, the better it gets. So I'm excited. Mine is still really new and I'm having fun experimenting with it, but I'm looking forward to keeping it going for a long time and enjoying all of these great recipes that I'm going to be showing you. Day 4 looked a lot like day 3, and there were a lot of bubbles. It still had that nice bread yeasty smell, and I just did the same steps over again. I mix up the starter a little bit, discard half, add 1 cup of filtered water and 1 cup of flour. On day 5, my starter started to look a little weird. It still had a good smell. It was a little bit more, I would say, sour smelling and a little more frothy, more separation, but all of that is very normal, and so I just stirred it all back in, discarded half, added 1 cup of filtered water and 1 cup of flour, stirred it, covered it, and set it aside for another 24 hours. I think that using the whole wheat flour really sped up this process. When I did this in the past, I did use an all-purpose flour, and it took me almost 10 days, I would say, to get a mature starter. So if that's what you're using, you can expect it might take a little bit longer. That's normal, and that's okay. On day 6, this is what my starter looked like. Again, it was kind of frothy. There was some separation going on, all perfectly fine. And the difference today is that we're going to feed our starter every 12 hours. So stir your starter to reincorporate all of the ingredients, discard half, add 1 cup of filtered water and 1 cup of flour, stir, cover, and set aside. And then you'll do the very same thing on day 7, every 12 hours. Hopefully by now you will have a mature starter that is ready to start baking with. And if you don't, that's okay. You can do this for up to 10 days or so. Just keep repeating the steps, feeding every 12 hours until you get a mixture that is very frothy when you check on it. There's not quite as much separation and you have that nice yeasty smell to it. So again on day 8, I'm going to feed my starter. So I'm going to discard half, but this time I am going to feed it with a cup of all-purpose flour in place of the whole wheat flour that I was using. Once you have a mature starter, you can feed it with whatever type of flour as long as it's unbleached that you like. And so if you used rye or whole wheat and you would prefer All Purpose, this is what you can do to convert your starter. About 4 to 6 hours after feeding your starter, you can use it in loads of different recipes, and I'm going to share with you some of the ones I've been trying, and in the links that I'm going to put in the description box, you're going to have access to even more. Before I start showing you some of the recipes, I just want to talk a little bit about storing your starter. I would recommend keeping it in your refrigerator unless you're planning on doing a ton of baking, because once you've had it out on your counter, you're going to need to feed it every 12 to 24 hours. But you can slow everything down by storing it in the refrigerator, and I just store mine in one of the La Prairie mason jars with a lid on it, and then you can take it out and feed it just once a week or even every 2 weeks, and it should be completely fine. And so that works great too if you're going to be away from home or anything like that, but that will allow you to decide when you want to use your starter without having to keep feeding it when you're not planning on using it, if that makes sense. These English muffins were the first thing I tried with my sourdough starter, and they were amazing. I got the recipe from Lisa from Farmhouse on Boone, and I will have her link, as I said, in the description box. And specifically to this recipe, I have to say this was probably one of the favorite things that I made out of the starter, and my family was so impressed that you could actually make these from home. They are just like the Thomas's English muffins, only 10 times better. They were so good. Right now, with bread being really scarce, they're a really easy thing to make in the mornings for breakfast or to use for sandwiches. Pizza dough was another thing that I couldn't wait to try, and the recipe that I used called for a scale because all of the measurements were in grams, which actually makes making bread or pizza crust or any other baked good so much easier. And so if it looks like I'm not paying much attention to the measurements, it's because I'm looking at the scale in this recipe. The link for this recipe is also in the description box, and I'll just tell you ahead of time that this recipe does take longer. It takes some planning ahead because you have to let the dough rise and ferment for a period of time. It was well worth it. This pizza crust was amazing. But if you don't have that kind of time and you would rather do something a little quicker, there are loads of recipes out there, so just search around on the internet and I know you will find one that you love as well. This pizza dough recipe makes enough for 2 very thin crust pizzas, which is something that we like, or you can have one sort of thicker, more traditional crust with this recipe. This crust had an amazing chewy texture to it, and the taste was just wonderful. The depth of flavor is far better than any that I've ever made with just traditional packaged yeast, so I definitely encourage you to give this one a try. This next recipe is the showstopper. It's that amazing sourdough loaf that all of us dream of making at home, and I got this recipe from Mary's Nest, and I will have it linked below, but all you need are 4 simple ingredients: your starter, your filtered water, some flour, and salt. And this recipe could not be easier. As Mary said, it is fast, no knead, and pretty much fail safe. So definitely check out her video because she goes step by step and into great depth about how to make this, and I definitely recommend that for your first time baking it. I'm going to give you, we'll call it the condensed version. So you are going to take a 1/2 cup of your fed starter, and I fed mine in the morning, and about 4 to 6 hours later it was ready for this recipe. Then you are going to combine that with 1 cup of filtered water. In a separate bowl, you'll mix together 3 cups of your bread flour or all-purpose flour, whatever flour you like, as long as it is not bleached, and add 1 teaspoon of finely ground sea salt. Mix the dry ingredients well, and then add to that your wet ingredients. Use your hand to mix well into a roughly formed ball. Cover the bowl with a towel and let it rest for 30 minutes. After the 30 minutes, remove the ball from the bowl onto a well-floured surface and then fold over a number of times and form into a round. Then line a baking sheet with some parchment paper and sprinkle on some flour. Transfer your dough onto the baking sheet and then sprinkle a little flour on top of it to make sure that nothing sticks. Then cover it with your towel and let it rest again until doubled in size, which is about an hour and a half to 2 hours. While the dough is rising, place your Dutch oven with the lid into your oven while it's cold and then preheat the oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. When your dough has doubled in size, you can score it with a sharp knife, and this ensures that when the bread rises and it cracks, it does so according to the pattern you create. So I'm making just a simple X mark on the top, but you can get creative and do anything you like. When your oven reaches 500 degrees Fahrenheit, remove your Dutch oven very carefully with pot holders and the lid, and then transfer your bread with the parchment paper right into the Dutch oven. And then you will bake the bread in the covered Dutch oven for 30 minutes. And again, if you don't have a Dutch oven, Mary has a lot of other suggestions for how to do it. This is the method that is most preferred. It mimics a bread oven that you would use in a bakery, so this is a great method if you have one. After the bread is baked for 30 minutes, you'll want to remove the lid and allow the bread to continue baking for about 5 to 10 minutes to brown it up further. And this is what it looked like when it came out. I was so pleased. For my first try, I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. Remove the bread from your Dutch oven by lifting it out using the parchment paper, transfer it onto a cooling rack, and then allow it to cool. When you're ready to eat, you can slice it with a serrated knife, and it is amazing. I saved ours until breakfast the next day, and it was a huge hit, and I'm sure that it will get better over time as I learn a little bit more about how to perfect the recipe further, but this really is a fail-safe recipe, and so it was really fun to have a lot of success on my first try. So I have Mary to thank for this amazing recipe. Definitely check out her channel. I'm including this last recipe because it is the solution for what to do with the discarded sourdough starter you have each time you feed your starter. And so once a week when you're feeding it and you need to discard half, you can use it to make pancakes. And these were amazing and so easy. This recipe came from Farmhouse on Boone, so again, check my description box for the link. There are other recipes for using your discarded sourdough starter, both at Farmhouse on Boone and also at Mary's Nest, so make sure you check out those channels. All you'll need for this recipe are 2 cups of your starter, 2 eggs, 1/4 cup of melted coconut oil or butter, 2 tablespoons of honey, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. You mix those things up and you have the most amazing pancake batter. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give me a thumbs up. I hope it gave you some motivation and inspiration for making a sourdough starter of your own so that you can enjoy these amazing recipes as well. If you're new here, I want to invite you to subscribe and join our Faith and Flour community. It's absolutely free and easy. All you have to do is click on my picture. Make sure you activate the bell icon so you're notified each time I upload a new video and you won't miss out on anything. Thank you guys so much for spending your time with me today. I look forward to talking with you in the comments and seeing you in the next video. Have a wonderful week.